This time we are in San Jose in the Cellworks Group office with Taher. Taher, who are you and what do you do?
My background, my academic background is engineering and business school. Before starting this company, Cellworks, I was almost 15 years in the semiconductor business, in the automation engineering business. And the idea behind Cellworks was to take those concepts and best practices and apply them into a completely different domain and sort of impact that industry.
I totally understand that you have this kind of automation and modeling background. Why did you choose healthcare?
Well, what happened is in the semiconductor space, for example, we had reached a point where every Christmas we would come up with a new product. We knew in 6 to 8 development cycle, and every time we sent a design for fabrication to Taiwan, almost 99% certain that you'd get working silicon. When we saw life sciences, everything was different. It took more than 10 to 12 years to get a product out, less than 8% chances of success, and the development cost was almost 10 times larger than in the semiconductor business. So from all the business vectors and so forth, it seemed a very opportune industry in order to apply what we had successfully deployed in the chip business in life sciences.
So your basic hypothesis was we, with our technology, can minimize or lower the deployment costs in the healthcare industry?
Yeah, effectively increase the success rate, because the biggest challenge was the failures. So either you improve your success rate, and if you have a bad product or a bad architecture, you fail early. So our whole philosophy was that effectively through simulation and modeling, you can actually improve your probability of success in an industry where the success rate was extremely low.
Okay, great. Taher, let's talk briefly about the business model. How does it work currently?
Well, the core competency in the organization is the technology, which is a simulation technology. So every aspect of it is governed based on that. So we had multiple choices in terms of business models. One was effectively being a service provider, and we early on decided that services was not something which we wanted to be in as a services company. The second option was being a technology provider, being an enabler to the pharmaceutical industry. We decided to follow a business model where we would be our own consumers of the technology after we intensively validate it, and design products using that technology which we can monetize by engaging with different players in the ecosystem.
And now your first product is based on the oncology. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, how this works, and how is it applied in the typical work process of your client?
Right. So cancer is one of our main focus areas, and one of the driving factors for selecting cancer is because of the whole movement towards personalization of treatments. It so happens that in cancers, every patient's genomic signature is completely different, and in that context, one size fits all approach does not work. So what traditionally used to be a blockbuster business model, where you take a drug product and deploy to as large a consumer base, that model falls apart based on personalization of medicine, and almost you start having a long tail business model. So in the context of cancer, the patient's genomic signature is what we use to create a simulation avatar of the patient cancer, and effectively then design a treatment which is personalized to that particular patient, and effectively either test it using the patient cancer cells outside the patient in the lab, or find a mechanism by which to take it to a clinical translation pathway.
Okay, totally understand that once you have the data set, then you can make some predictions on what kind of treatment to use. But in the first place, how do you get this kind of data set that you can really use for making sensible prediction?
So the core technology, simulation technology, is effectively built based on, so over the last many decades, there have been in the science field, there has been tons and tons of publications which effectively talk about the specific connections of the different biological players. So the simulation technology is analogous to a maps. You can think of it as a Google's map with the difference. So it actually builds in a connection by connection, the guts, the pathways inside a cancer cell, with the added difference that you can actually simulate it. You can actually perturb any pathway, any nodes or combinations of them, and see the effect of it propagating down the network. So essentially it's been built based on information published out there and aggregated together manually in a simulation model, so you can actually do what-if analysis and run studies and experiments to predict what would be the effect of these perturbations, either drug perturbations or other perturbations on the cancer endpoints.
Is this the only data that is flowing in, or did you also develop a machine learning algorithm that learns over time?
We haven't used machine learning. Effectively, what happens is in science there are a lot of contradictory data sets, and to avoid basically the phenomena of garbage in and garbage out, we've effectively used manual mechanisms to aggregate the data, and all kinds of automation is applied thereafter. So when we're building the model, we manually look at each and every research paper, the experiment conditions, and all the parameters which determine the verification of the data, and then thereafter all the steps are automated.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the oncology ecosystem and what is your go-to-market strategy?
Well, there are two ways we are approaching it. One is in the process of modeling different patients and different segments of patient population. We are coming up with our own therapeutic programs, which we are patenting and validating. So we are in-house building a library of patents of therapeutic programs with targeting very specific patient segments. So that's sort of a more of a medium to long-term strategy in terms of collecting a library of patents. More from a short-term to medium-term go-to-market strategies, we're looking how this personalization can be deployed as a decision-making algorithm in the clinical practice. So in that capacity, we've started talking to clinical groups who effectively are collecting patients' tissue samples and getting it genomically profiled, and working with them and collaborating with them how we can actually build the next layer of personalization where they can actually translate that information into actionable insight.
Okay. Taher, can you tell us a little bit about the players in this oncology market?
Well, in general, in the pharmaceutical business and also, of course, in the oncology business, there are multiple players in the ecosystem. This is probably one of those industries where, typically you have examples of multi-sided business models. This is truly multi-sided. So in this business, the clinicians are the final arbitrators in terms of making decision in terms of what treatments, interventions. The consumer or the patient effectively takes the direction from the physicians and does not pay for the services. So the group which pays for it are the insurance companies and the payers, and the suppliers into the ecosystems are the pharmaceutical companies, the diagnostic genomics companies, and the overall industry is then regulated by FDA, for example, and other regulated body. So you have a multifactorial ecosystem out there. So in terms of the strategy for launching these kind of go-to-market strategy, we have to start working with the clinical groups in terms of building validations, credibility, and getting them on board. Once that process is ongoing, then you effectively, through patient advocacy groups, as well as working with different members like the pharmaceuticals and diagnostics, you sort of indirectly or directly influence the payers to sort of start paying for these kind of technology and solutions.
Okay, great. Let's talk briefly about the market development, especially in the oncology, for example. I mean, this is quite of a big industry in the healthcare industry. Can you tell us a little bit more about the technology drivers over there and maybe some trends you have identified over the last years?
Well, I think the personalization of cancer treatments has become mainstream. This is something which is widely accepted and deployed, and all major clinical centers globally have the initiative in terms of being able to find the right treatment for the right patient. I think that's the main focus. the idea behind the simulation is the fact is there is tons and tons of big data which is being generated as a consequence of the next gen sequencing, for example, which companies are deploying. So the cost of sequencing, which used to be, in thousands and hundreds of thousands, has dropped down to less than $1,000 now.
Wow.
And the ability to sequence these cancer tissues, be able to generate this big amount of data in gigabytes, is effectively creating a situation where you have the data, but you do not have an actionable pathway to sort of intervene or influence the clinical decisions. Mm-hmm. So that's where the predictive technology fits in beautifully in terms of being able to take advantage of the move to big data, creating a patient-specific avatar, and then through the modeling approach, coming up with a scientific rationale and a treatment which is sort of actionable and something which a clinical group can actually utilize for intervention.
Oh, okay, great. Taher, we always try to help our first-time entrepreneurs learn from great entrepreneurs like you. What advice can you give them, especially related when somebody comes to you and says, I would like to start a healthcare company? What would you give him advice?
Well, I think the biggest thing to watch out in the healthcare business is effectively if you're going to be regulated. So for example, the regulatory aspects are key consideration in the healthcare business. So if you're doing something which is sort of beyond that, for example, if you're coming up with healthcare applications on mobile phones, so those things would be less regulated, and the ability for you to go to market is going to be easier and faster. So if the interest is to be able to get to market in a couple of years, need to watch out from the regulatory side of things what the implications are. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I think, which is true for whether it's in healthcare or any business right now, pretty much you don't have all the answers when you start a venture. Mm. Looking for all the answers on day one, I've never seen that happen in my personal lifetime in terms of we knew all the answers. So in that sense, you've got to sort of take the leap of faith out there. And the third and the final point, which is very critical for most ventures to start, is the financing aspect. So if the business requires some kind of external financing down the road, if there's a strategy to build a prototype through some kind of a bootstrap method or some other kind of a technique, that would be ideal, because the prototype with the idea is a good inflection point for the external financing.
Okay, great. And in terms of healthcare, isn't it quite expensive to bootstrap? Let's say, for example, if I would try to develop a cancer treatment or something like that.
Absolutely. I think not only is it expensive and difficult to develop the treatment, also the aspect of taking it through a clinical study is prohibitively expensive. So I guess if you're looking at life sciences, you may have to look at those peripheral areas which could, if intervention is one aspect of it, treatment is one aspect of it, it could be in areas, for example, electronic health records, different kinds of bioinformatics solutions, and other kinds of technology solutions which sort of sit on the periphery. I guess the closer you move towards intervening and impacting the treatment, the more the higher the bar in terms of regulatory as well as the development process.
Taher, what would you advise somebody who is currently working as an employee and is just thinking about, should I start a startup or not? What would you advise him?
Well, it seems like given the recent overall trend and the excitement towards new ventures, it's a good time. At least right now, for the last couple of years, it has been a very good time for starting, and if you have the right idea. As I said, the main thing is in many of these starting a new venture, you cannot expect to get all the ideas, and in fact, almost always the business model or the plan which you start out with and the plan which actually you end up executing turns out to be quite different. So given that aspect, once the right idea is there and the ability for you to sort of, and you think that you have a right team to execute on it, it's a good time to start a new venture. Okay, great.
Taher, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Manu.
Cellworks Group is a very good example of how technology can help all of us become more healthy and maybe have less cancer. So next time you think about starting your own company, think about how technology can influence your industry. Thanks. Great.